This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to the Morning Break live on Monday, 3rd June. I'm your host today, Khanh-Duc Kuttig. And this is the third episode in our International School series. My guest is a teacher from an international school in Bangkok.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, everybody. How are you today? I hope you're fine wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. If you're live or listening back, we're happy to have you with us. Welcome to the third episode in my International School series. I have an educator here with me today who'll be talking with us about literacy in Key Stage 1. My guest today is Anna Beshovkova. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Almost.
Almost. Oh, correct me. Tell me how to do it, Anna.
It's a Czech surname, and it's pronounced as Beshovcova.
Beshovkova. Okay, see,
Yeah.
it's the ch sound at the end.
Yeah, that's yeah.
It's really good to have you with me.
Thank you
Dear
so much for
listeners.
inviting me. Thank you.
Dear listeners, Anna and I will be exploring literacy in Key Stage 1, so the early primary school years, and not just any kind of literacy or any kind of school, but actually in schools where English is the medium of instruction, but not actually the first language or the home language of the pupils themselves. Now, but before we do that, before we dive into that, what exactly is literacy? Now, you ask anybody, right, what literacy means to them, and you probably get something like it's the ability to read and write. But what exactly is this really, right? What does it mean to be able to read and write? Well, the National Literacy Trust defines literacy as the ability to write, read, speak, and listen in a way that lets us communicate effectively and make sense of the world. And it's this literacy skill, or rather the skills associated with literacy, that Anna will be talking with us about. So, Anna, once again, thank you for joining us. I'm actually really excited about this. It's something I've always been curious about. I ask myself, like, how do they do it? Like, really, both teachers and students, how do they get from that stage of sounding out to independent writing to processing language and things like that. And I think oftentimes I take my students and my own kids literacy skills for granted. First,
Yes,
though,
absolutely.
yeah, I know, right? It's like we've been doing it all our life. Like, it's
Yes.
just,
If you ask me, like, I would not be able to tell you how I learned to read and write. I would not be able to describe this to you. I cannot. I might be able to tell you something about my second language, which is English, right? How I learned to read and write in English, but definitely not about my primary language.
yeah. And I mean, German is my second language, and I couldn't tell you how I learned to do that. I mean, I learned it in Singapore, so I didn't learn it in a European country. And English, yeah, I have no clue. I mean, that's some, between 30 to 40 years ago. But before we get into that, before we deep dive into that, how did you get to EAL? How did you get to the international school?
Yes, so my name is Anna. I'm Russian, and I have been working internationally for about 17 years now. My degree is in teaching English as a foreign language, actually. And at some point, I decided to start working internationally for family reasons. And I think the first 12 years of my international career, I was actually in EFL. Uh, uh, I worked for such huge players in EFL, in the EFL sphere as International House and British Council, in various positions: teacher, teacher trainer, academic manager. And then at some point, I realized that when my daughter was growing up, I realized that I would really want to find out more about teaching children. I did teach children before that as well, but it was all EFL. It was all teaching English as a foreign language. Whereas even for my daughter, English is her primary language. It's not her passport language, but it is her primary language. So yeah, at some point, I just felt that I really wanted to find out more about what it is to help students, to help develop English in a different kind of setting. And I found this, wonderful opportunity. Got a job at one of the international schools in Thailand, and I have been working for them ever since for the last 5 years. So yeah, my background is a lot in EFL. However, for the last 5 years, I have been working as an EL specialist, EL coordinator for Key Stage 1, and I specialize in early literacy, and I specialize in helping students who have both EL and SEN needs, special educational needs.
That's really, really interesting. I find that massively interesting because I've spoken to so many other language teaching professionals who come into, whatever the stage they are in their English language teaching profession, they all come into it through EFL, and at some point they find something that keeps them there, whether it's personal, like in for you, where you say, okay, I want to go and do something else, or in my case where I was doing something, I did the same as you. Essentially, I taught for Berlitz, and I taught for different corporate clients here in Germany, and I kind of drifted, from place to place, just because it's the nature of the job. And then at one point, I landed at a university, and I found my feet there, and I've been there ever since. So you found EAL as the thing that, as that aspect of language teaching that wows you, and you've been there ever since. Tell
Yeah,
us.
like I
Go
mentioned
ahead.
before, I saw my child growing. I saw my daughter was growing up, and I could see that English was becoming her primary language. Her Russian and Czech language were not really developing very well at that point. So for me, it was very interesting to see how all of her languages will be developing. And of course, she went to an international school. So I had very direct experience of how languages develop in a multilingual child. So for me, it was a very, very interesting topic to explore. And I thought that being an EL teacher would give me, all the necessary knowledge and experience um, to explore it even further. And like you said, a lot of us come from the EFL background because EL, it's not EFL, of course, but for a lot of our students, even though we call them EL students, for a lot of them, English is not even their second language when they start studying at international schools. It is their third language. It might be their fourth language. For many, it's really a foreign language in which
Yeah,
they need to study, in which they need to understand subjects, and that's not not a small feat.
exactly. And I mean, the language systems, they're just so different. I mean, for some students, I remember
Mm-hmm.
being in Singapore and growing up in Singapore. You have ethnically Chinese students who have one of the other dialects at home, and the written language, right? The written language is different from, our written
Yes.
language in English.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So even that concept of blending, or that concept that
Mm-hmm.
the letter A is as in apple, or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and things like that, that's not something that's familiar to them. And like you say, some of them come from interracial families where they have other languages that they speak at home. So that, and especially at a young age, I mean, it is, there has been research that has shown that children learn languages faster the younger, they are when they're introduced to it. But what we underestimate is the cognitive challenge, because something's
Mm-hmm.
got to give, you know, and that's what I'd like to hear from you about. So, literacy, if you had to define literacy, how would you define it?
Well, I really quite like the definition, the second one that you've mentioned, that it's all about the communicative purpose, right? It needs to
Mm-hmm.
make sense. Whatever you read or write, it first of all needs to make sense to you, but also it needs to make sense um, to the external stakeholders, let's say to the teacher, to other students.
Mm-hmm.
And there should be a clear communicative purpose to it, whether you want to convey some information or whether you want to ask for something, whether you want to describe something. So for me, like you said, literacy is all about the development of reading and writing skills, but with a clear communicative purpose and a clear meaning, which is clear to you and clear to others.
Mm. And for your students, the children that you work with, what's their purpose?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. Actually, I think before I even start talking about literacy, it would make sense for me to outline what exactly what my context is. So I specifically focus on teaching reading and writing to children who are in years 1 and 2, which means they're between 5 and 7 years old. And they have, because we are talking about EAL students, we are talking about children who have very, very limited English, especially in year 1. So they have very limited oral English, and obviously they have very limited literacy skills. Well, they're non-existent in most cases, and they're non-existent both in English and in their home languages or primary languages. So for instance, if I teach Thai or Chinese students, most of them are not able to read and write in their primary language as well as English. And this is, this makes teaching reading and writing quite challenging. So yes, and that's why basically I started at some point thinking a lot about how we are going to help those students who really have very, very limited oral skills to become successful readers and writers. Because in our school, we are a British curriculum school, and we have quite highly set sort of expectations in terms of reading and writing, even for children who are in year 1, who are just 5.5, 6 years old. I'm not sure if that's the same thing that if you've experienced the same in your teaching career, but
Mm-hmm.
that's what it is for us. So I have
Wow.
this challenge
Wow.
in my profession, in my job, to make sure that our youngest students in year 1 without much English start reading and writing in English as quickly as possible. That's my goal, basically.
But that is such a challenge, though, Anna.
It
That
is a challenge.
I,
It
I
is a
cannot
real challenge.
I cannot imagine. I mean, I've never taught
Mm-hmm.
anything like that. Like, I mean, like what you say, like they come
Mm-hmm.
in with just zero English, but also they've not
Mm-hmm.
developed that literacy in their home language either. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think the closest I've ever got to, a pure beginner
Mm-hmm.
is still a beginner, but a beginner who's had, X number of years
Mm-hmm.
in German, and then they know, the alphabets and they know the sounds, and there's that transfer, but you can at least work with that. But
Mm-hmm.
but it's like you're working with a clean slate,
Yeah, yeah.
and even
Well, not necessarily a full clean slate. Like we can talk about it later. But basically,
okay,
that's the thing. If we talk about typically developing successful readers and writers, by the time we ask children to read and write, for example, in their primary language, in their home language, they would have had ample exposure to the language, right, for the first 5 or 6 years of their life.
exactly, yeah.
Then they would have had their oral skills quite well developed by that time. So they would be
Hmm.
able to express themselves orally. They would have gained quite a wide range of vocabulary, etc., etc. And this is exactly what we're missing when we need to teach children to read and write, EL children in my context, for instance, when we need to teach them to read and write. So this is something that we need to really consider when we structure our reading and writing lessons.
Yeah, I mean that that for me, that's just mind blowing. It's still a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember my daughter. She was born in the UK, and the first 3 years of her life, she was in kindergarten in the UK, and all her peers. So we left. We left when she was 3.5. We left the year before. She would have gone to reception, what they call, where we were living, they call it reception.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
equate it with 2 years of kindergarten, but they develop literacy skills there. They do the whole phonics thing, and
Mm-hmm.
so she had some introduction to phonics when she was in
Mm-hmm.
kindergarten, and I was a bit, kind of distressed, sad when we left because I thought, oh no, she's not going to learn how to read and write in English, and she's going to have to switch to German. And but I noticed that because she had, we kept on with the phonics, and because we were still speaking English at home, so when she was sounding out words, and sometimes words don't always sound out the way they're pronounced, but she'd have that element of word recognition because she'd have it in her vocabulary, right?
Mm-hmm.
She'd have that linguistic knowledge, that language knowledge, and that was the same then eventually
Mm-hmm.
for German because she had that. But whoa, that's such a challenge. I cannot imagine the job that you do so
Well,
passionately.
well, basically, yeah. Again, when we talk about, for example, learning to read and write, well, let's talk about reading first, for instance. Yeah, we talk about two cognitive processes working simultaneously to support each other. We're talking about the top-down processing and the bottom-up processing. So the bottom-up processing is, it's not just the phonics, of course, but it's, we start from the tiniest parts of the language. We start from sounds, we start from letters, we're putting them together into words and then words into sentences, etc., etc., etc. So that's working, yeah, from the bottom and going up. And that's where
Hmm.
phonics comes in, right? That's where the knowledge of sounds, the knowledge of sound letter correspondences, digraphs, etc., comes in. That's blending, that's segmentation, etc., etc., etc. But on the other hand, simultaneously, whenever we start blend, for instance, our brain simultaneously starts thinking about whether, like you said, this combination of sounds or letters can be matched to already existing image of a word or knowledge of a word in our brain. And that's the top-down processing. That's our use of contextual, of our context knowledge, of our syntactic knowledge, morphological knowledge. Even if we do not understand it very explicitly, it can be very implicit knowledge. That's the knowledge of that's our existing vocabulary. And all of that feeds and combines with the bottom-up processing. And that's how we arrive at a word. Yeah, so I think we talked about it with you previously. Yeah? For a child who knows what a log is, if they go log, they
Yeah,
will arrive at the word log much more
yeah,
easily simply because they know what it is. It will send a mental image of a log and they will think, oh, okay, yes, that's a log.
yeah, yeah.
And I think we need to understand that for children who are in EL, who come with very, very limited English language, there are difficulties in both processes. So on the one hand, they might have never been exposed to phonics, the way some other children who have been through the UK system of education in kindergarten. So they might have never been exposed to phonics on the one hand, which means that their bottom-up processing route is already, quite challenging to use it. But on the other hand, they actually may miss all this contextual knowledge and all the knowledge of vocabulary, which helps them to arrive at the word.
Exactly. They don't
And
have that background. They
yeah,
can't make the
yeah,
associations.
yeah, they can't make the association, right? And very often we find when I first started working at my international school, I would sometimes see how we would even be able, and even now I can see the same thing. We would have children who would be able to put the l, o, g together, and they will blend it into a log, and who have absolutely no idea what a log is. And if they cannot infer meaning from this word, that they will not very often be able to infer meaning from the whole sentence and even the whole text after this. So these are the challenges that we need to where we are trying now to address in all of our reading lessons, that we're trying to make sure that we work towards activating and supporting both top-down and bottom-up processing routes and processing skills.
How do you introduce them to all that
Yep.
amount of language
Yep.
so that they can develop that background knowledge, and then when they see a word they can go, oh yeah, that's that.
Well, first of all, let's think, I mean, like, it's all like our reading lessons and our writing lessons, they do take place, within the mainstream curriculum. Like, our students are constantly exposed to a lot of English, a lot of language. So obviously they will be picking it up. That's like the whole background. But if we talk about, for instance, again, reading lessons in particular, of course, we are going to take a book which is appropriate for them. Like, for example, a level 1 or level 1 plus book with very, very simple sentences. Like, for example, I am a cat. I can, I don't know, hop, 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 for instance. And then, of course, any lesson would start by actually activating their background knowledge to set the context right. So maybe you would want to show them a picture of a cat. Maybe you would want to try to elicit some words from them or give them the word.
Whoops.
So you do. Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. So you can do all of that with the help of visuals, and very, very, simple visuals and gestures, etc. And then after you already engaged them and you activated all the right background knowledge, so they're ready to engage with the topic, and they already have some understanding of the topic in their first language, for instance, even if it is encoded in their first language. After that, we would normally go into the phonics stage of the lesson, or we would go into the vocabulary stage of the lesson. Or usually it's both of them. So we would pick out all the target sounds, from the book, and we would pre-teach them, work on them, and then put them in words and try to blend the words, very simple words from the book. And always this sort of blending, it will always be combined with visuals, so that if they blend a word, that it will be immediately matched to a visual representation of the word, so that we automatically, like, simultaneously, we're practicing their phonics skills, but we're also building up their vocabulary. So by the time they get to read the book, so they would have had their prior knowledge of the topic activated, and they would have had practice with the target sounds. They would have had practice blending words, but also they would have had like exposure to the images, so that it's also their vocabulary and understanding of what a word means has been improved. And only after we've been through these stages, we would actually ask our children to start reading books independently or in pairs or as a group.
Well, that's a lot though. I can imagine for
Yeah.
them, for the children, it's cognitively a lot of work, because
It's a lot of work. Yeah.
with native English speakers, right? When I look at it,
Mhm.
when I see it with my daughter, when she did the whole phonics thing to begin with, she already had, that level of language. So that worked with her. And my son, he didn't get phonics. He only just started with formal English classes in school this academic year. He's in primary 3, but he has the background, right? The English L1 at home, and they just work. I mean, here in his school, they work on the principle of sight words, which I think is a whole kettle of fish altogether. I'd like to hear a bit more about your students, because I think it's really, really fascinating how they get from that stage of almost nothing to being able to read independently. But first, we have some messages from our sponsors, and then we'll be right back.
Empowering education with Easy for You, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionizes the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy for You. transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easy4u.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MAT leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the three-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
With the general election approaching, some political parties have already turned their attention to education. All major media outlets have covered Labour's plans to add VAT to private school fees and the Conservatives' comments on increasing apprenticeships by getting rid of rip-off degrees. However, the BBC features a story on proposals by the Lib Dems to increase taxes on social media giants as well as companies such as Amazon and Google. The revenue raised, the party says, would then be used to fund mental health professionals for all England state schools. The tax itself already exists and is known as the Digital Services Tax, but the Liberal Democrats say they would triple the amount the companies paid in it. Recent NHS statistics reported by the BBC show nearly 340,000 children and young people are currently on waiting lists to access mental health services in England. In response, the Conservatives said they'd already increased training places for mental health nurses, while Labour said it would put mental health support in every school. In Teesside, the BBC Tees News website reports on Nigerian students seeking help from a food charity. An economic crash in Nigeria has left international students at Teesside University struggling to afford tuition fees, with some even blocked from their studies and ordered to return home. The manager of Thornaby's Sprouts Community Food Charity spoke to BBC Local Radio and said 75% of their clients were now the struggling students and that it was at maximum capacity. The university itself said it was providing support and that international applicants must provide evidence of sufficient funds when applying for a student visa. Nigeria is currently experiencing its worst economic crisis in a generation. The value of its currency has been depreciating by more than 200% against the dollar. As a result, students at many UK universities have seen savings wiped out and budgets having to be significantly reduced. Some students at Teesside University have complained that the university's decision to change the payment plan and reduce instalments from 7 to 3 have exacerbated issues. The university is offering case-by-case support to those affected. In Northern Ireland, the TES reports that Education Minister Paul Givan has warned schools they must make school uniforms more affordable and that a price cap is being considered. He said the cost of uniform was an unnecessary burden on families by branded clothing and uniforms being available from only one supplier. Mr Given said proposals due to go out for public consultation
This spring will include strengthened guidance on the school uniforms. The decisions came in response to a motion in Stormont on making uniforms affordable. Mr. Givens said school uniforms create a sense of belonging to a school community, but that they should also act to ensure that pupils of all backgrounds feel welcome in the school. He went on to say that while many schools had followed current guidance around value for money, there are other schools which have not, and that this is not a situation which I am going to permit to continue. Further details on the proposals, which could also include the price cap, can be found in TES magazine online. Holiday prices feature in a Schools Week article on criticism faced by holiday company Butlins after it was accused of undermining schools' work to boost attendance. The criticism came after the company advertised term time breaks as great value getaways. The firm offers a 4-night midweek term time break for just under £20 per person, much cheaper than rates during school holidays. Schools Week reporters posed as parents and asked if the holidays were suitable for school-aged children, and were told all breaks are suitable for all ages. Ministers have pushed all year for schools to improve their attendance rates, as persistence absence rates are nearly double pre-pandemic levels. Several multi-academy trust chief executives have commented that marketing holidays which specifically target term time is not civic-minded, but understood the attraction for families struggling to afford a family break, who are being exploited by the companies. Full details of the story are available on Schools Week's website. Finally, aposiopesis was the final word spelled correctly by 12-year-old Bruat Soma to win the 2024 Scripps National Spelling Bee in the USA. Soma takes home a $50,000 prize after spelling 29 words in 90 seconds and getting them all correct. For those of you who are curious, aposiopesis is a term used for the device of suddenly breaking off in speech. An example of this rhetorical device could be get out or else, with the threat remaining unsaid. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
Okay, so welcome back. Here we are, back today in the third episode in our series with educators from international schools. I have with me an EAL specialist, Anna. We've been talking about developing children's literacy skills. Can't even pronounce it. Literacy skills in Key Stage 1. And I was just thinking two things. Aposiopesis, I think was the word. Not something I can spell just by blending the sounds, reverse
Yes.
segmentation or blending.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa. Go ahead.
It's a very interesting. How the title of this talk, we wanted it to be something. We wanted to mention that it's more than just phonics, right? And it is indeed more than just phonics, because
Right.
if you look at our typical reading lessons, it would be probably one of the six stages. Like I said before, we start by activating their background knowledge, then we do a little bit of phonics, then we do a little bit of vocabulary work, really EFL style very often. Then we would do the actual reading individually or in groups, and then we would go to the comprehension stage and try to do a range of comprehension activities. And then at the end, we would try to make sure that there's this communicative follow-up, either reading or a writing stage, a very short one, a speaking or a writing stage, a very short one, so they can show, that there is that they can experience this communicative purpose of the text that they have, for example,
purposeful
read.
reading and writing. Yeah.
And you see, phonics is just one tiny stage really in this lesson, and all other stages they also teach our students very, very invaluable skills, including guessing meaning from context, including guessing the meaning of words or guessing words by using visuals presented in the book, or by using their whole word recognition skills, right? Very often students, they would like for example, if I'm not sure about you, but I never really learned phonics when I was learning to read in English.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
never
would just
did.
see right. I would just
Yeah.
see, look at a word, and I would remember what it means, and I would recognize it again when the next time that I would be reading a text with a word. And it's the same one of the skills that we're really, really encouraging our students to develop. So that's why we want to go beyond phonics. Of course, we need phonics. Phonics is important. It gives them a solid foundation in tackling a word they don't know, and tackling it sort of professionally by using their sound letter knowledge. But on the other hand, we want them to be well equipped with a range of reading strategies they can apply to understand, to decode and understand the text. And I think this is very, very important. And the funniest thing is that we have a lot of our students, despite being EAL and despite have very limited English, they would soon be able to start reading level 2 and level 3. We normally only expect like a 3-level progress within 1 year. And they would be able to talk about the book, so they clearly understand the book and they decode it, they read it. And then
Yeah.
if you give them a pure phonics test, like a phonics screener that they use in the UK, for instance, a lot of them actually don't do very well. And I think it's precisely because we're stripping away all the good reading strategies that we have taught them to use while reading books, reading texts. And we're focusing specifically on this pure skill of blending. But it is
Right.
just, like I said, but it's just one tiny skill in a range of skills that we're teaching them to become successful readers. So for me, it's always very, very interesting how the results, the reading, reading scores we get when we talk about reading books and reading text, in our case, for EL students, they never really correlate that well with a pure phonics screener tests that we give them that are often used in the UK, for instance.
Right. I mean, with the
Mm-hmm.
phonics screener test, I mean, I know very
Mm-hmm.
little. I have to admit, I know very little, but what I've heard and what I
Mm-hmm.
understand of, what kids do in reception year
Mm-hmm.
is they really do focus on that, basic level, sounding out words, understanding
Mm-hmm.
words and sounds and how they blend together to make bigger words and things like that, whereas and that's what they do, right? And then there's that word recognition as well, where you get a list of words and you're supposed to identify which are real words and which
Mm-hmm.
are not,
Yeah.
and things like
Which
that.
is extremely tricky for our children to do, AL children, because they just simply wouldn't know if a word is real or unreal. For them, it's a
Exactly.
word I know and the word I don't know. And that's why our results for phonics screener tests are always quite low for EL students, because they are always trying, if they see a non-word, they would try to blend it, but their brain would really try to find an approximate word that they would be familiar with,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's how their brain processes reading texts at the moment. They don't have the
I mean,
vocabulary extensive enough to be able to tell otherwise.
exactly. I mean, that's what my daughter did in the beginning after we'd moved to Germany, and she was, she was still very interested in reading, learning to read and write in English, and English is still her dominant language, still her L1. And I remember when she was 4 years old, we were already living in Germany, and she loved these National Geographic books, these encyclopedias, all about dinosaurs, all about pets, that series, and she tried to read and she tried to sound the words out, and some of them worked and some of them didn't. Initially, I did question whether it was because she had no continuous phonic input, no formal phonics input by way of schooling, because we were already living here, but it just ended up being just words that they're the sight words, they're words that you just can't sound out. But I noticed that the more complex words, she was crazy about dinosaurs at the time, all the names of the dinosaurs, she'd see it and she'd know what it was. She didn't
Yes,
need to,
yes, yes.
right? She didn't
Hmm.
need to sound it out. And you
And
can't
that's
sound out
because, yeah, that's
pterodactyl,
because
it starts with a P.
that successful readers do. You don't always have to rely on chunking, blending. Eventually, we want everyone to bypass, blending and segmenting. We want them to go straight into the word recognition. Yeah, when your brain sends you a clear signal that you know this word by seeing the letters. Yes, ideally, that's what we want to get to. That's what
Exactly. And
successful readers get to. Hmm.
I mean, one of our sponsors, excuse me, sponsors, reading, and I noted in the ad it's from the National Literacy Trust, right? And they talk about confident readers. That's what we want to develop. We want to develop confident readers. We want to develop fluency. And in your case, we need to come back to your context. My question, it must be really challenging because Key Stage 1, that's year 1 and year 2, and you have to get them at that level in 2 school years, less than 24 months, really. How
Mm-hmm. Well,
do
again, like, I mean, obviously, when you teach reading and writing, you would always focus a lot on, pre-teaching vocabulary, on activating their background knowledge, on practicing the target language that they would need in order to complete reading and writing tasks. So there is actually a lot of EFL teaching embedded into our EEL reading and writing lessons. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, we need to understand that our EL students, they also get a lot of, like I said previously, they get a lot of exposure to good language, and they have a lot of opportunities to use their English in their mainstream classroom. We also have special courses, pull-out courses for students with very, very minimal English who are just developing their English proficiency. We have a lot of special pull-out courses, which again help them to build up their vocabulary, help them to practice their speaking skills and gain, get their oracy to the level where it should be in year 1 or year 2. So it doesn't happen in vacuum, right?
right,
The whole
right,
system works towards developing their language. And in those reading and writing lessons, you just focus a little bit more on choosing the right book or choosing the right text for them to practice reading and writing. And you focus on specific strategies in a very, like I said, focused manner.
yeah.
And each time you do it, you will already see that they will have more and more knowledge of English that would help them to complete these tasks better and better with each time you do that with them.
Do you choose the materials? Do you choose the books together with the subject teachers, or is there a set, book list that,
Yeah,
EL teachers working in such contexts can refer to?
yeah, we use all the traditional kind of common series. We use the ORT, Oxford Reading Owl, then it's the Pearson and floppy phonics. I can't remember the further names,
Okay,
but yeah, we
so
use all those series. So like everybody uses the same books. It's just that some of the students would probably start at level 3
right.
because they have different level of skills development, and with EL students we would normally start with level 1, which is basically a picture and a word under it.
Right.
Then progressing to level 1 plus with very simple sentences and so on and so forth.
Would you be able to say, whether, or according to your observations, have you observed that students with a particular home language find developing, English language skills, reading, writing skills in English more challenging, or maybe kids who come in with 3 home languages find developing their literary skills more challenging? Is there any observation that you can share with us?
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't have any observations of it being more or less challenging depending on the home language. But I do know that there is a massive correlation between what a child is able to do in their first language in terms of reading and writing and what they will be able to do in reading and writing in English. So we have a group of, I'm not going to name the nationality, but within this nationality, it is quite customary for children to start reading and writing quite early in their own culture. And those
Right,
students traditionally do much better in reading and writing in English because they simply transfer the right skills.
right, right,
And again, traditionally, we do have another group, like another nationality. Again, I'm not going to name it. They do not start teaching their children to read and write up until the age of 7. And traditionally, those children find it quite challenging to learn to read and write in English because within the within the UK system, you would expect them to be able to do it by the age of 5.5,
yeah,
right, 6 years old.
exactly,
So it's, for me,
exactly.
it's not the home language; it's the development of skills in another language. And
Okay.
you can very clearly see how easily those skills are transferred between the languages.
Yeah, I mean that is true what you say, that in certain cultures or in certain academic cultures,
Yeah,
they push that whole reading writing to a
yeah, yeah.
much later age. Yeah.
Hmm.
You mentioned earlier that when your EAL students do these phonics screening tests, they do poorly. They don't do as well as they do,
Yeah, they don't do as well as
right?
in general reading tests.
So how would you test? How would you work them towards developing these confident and fluency skills that they need in literacy? And how do you know that they've achieved that level that they need to have?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, if I'm perfectly honest with you, like if you ask me whether I do trust the results of a phonics screener test, my real honest kind of answer would be no. I don't find them very important because I know that like I said previously, I really want my students to be versatile, well-developed readers, having a range of strategies that would enable them to extract meaning from a text, for instance. So if you ask about a phonics screen in particular, in fact, very often if a child cannot pass this phonics screener test, we need to correlate it with a few other outcomes in some other tests to make sure that to establish whether there is a real difficulty in phonics or whether some other underlying issues or difficulties. Like for instance, sometimes students don't do very well in a phonics screener if they simply haven't been exposed to enough phonics, for example, to later digraphs or trigraphs. So if
Right.
that's the reason, and you can see it straight away because they would be able to blend words, and the moment they get to the digraph they don't know, they wouldn't be able to do that. So in this case, you would need to go and probably do some phonics intervention lessons to make sure that they have more exposure to those later digraphs, later trigraphs, alternative spellings, etc. If you do a screener test and you have a child who is quite successful in reading existing words, real words, but finds non-existing words quite challenging, non-words quite challenging, then again, this very often can be dealt with by just uh, clarifying the concept again, doing a little bit more practice reading non-words with the child. However, there's also a group of students who, if we see that uh, they're able to read books at a relatively appropriate level for their age. However, when it comes to the phonics screener test and they find it very, very challenging to blend decontextualized words and non-words, then very often we would also start looking into perhaps if there are perhaps some other difficulties that we need to establish, like the difficulties simply with blending or with yeah with blending or with not hearing, not hearing, not being able, not with consonant clusters, for instance.
Right.
This will already be like a remit of our learning support team. So we will start involving our learning support team to see if there is something specifically challenging for a child
Right.
about blending.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You shared.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Continue.
No, no.
Continue.
I mean, because your question was originally about fluency. But again, with the fluency, for me, being able to pass the screener test is not an indication that a child is a good reader. It's just an indication that they have enough phonics. So for me, if a child is able to read an age-appropriate level in reading, like for instance, ORT 7 for year 1, ORT 12 for year 2, and they're able not just to decode, but they're able to answer comprehension questions, they're able to talk about the book, this would, for me, would be an indication that that child is a good reader rather than a phonics screener test.
And what if
Hmm.
they were able to read and they understood the book, but
Hmm.
they felt that they didn't have enough English to talk about it, so that maybe their spoken
Hmm. Yeah.
expression was a bit lacking? Have
Yeah.
you had
Yeah.
such a case?
Oh, yes, yes, all the time, all the time. In fact, I think my students, they do indeed, like you said, they absolutely, they feel that they understood the book much better than, than what they are able to express orally. So in these cases, I think I mentioned it previously that one of the stages in our reading lessons is the comprehension practice stage, right? And the
Right.
community follow-up stage. So then, as a teacher, I would need to decide what kind of comprehension activity I'm going to give my students so they can actually talk about the book, because sometimes they would be able to express understanding by using fewer words, right? And
Right.
sometimes, so,
Right.
so you just basically you just adapt your comprehension stage activity to the level of English that they have, while simultaneously trying to ensure that they can say more. Like, for instance, if you want them to retell the story, you can give them pictures and you can give them a few sentence starters to match to each picture, so they can start describing each picture with the help of a sentence starter, which will mean that they will try to use a little bit more of their oral English, and they will eventually be able to retell the story using a wider range of language. So I think for me, that's why comprehension stages and communicative follow-up stages in our reading lessons, they're very, very important, because these are the ones that help us to develop their oral skills.
Yeah.
In fact, I really think that our reading lessons, I really value them, and I'm really, really happy that our school has the luxury of time to ensure that all children who need help, they get at least 1 or 2 or 3 sometimes reading lessons a week, because we just focus on such a range of skills in these lessons. Yeah? We focus on the development of oral skills, we focus on the development of phonics, we try to increase their vocabulary, we sometimes even fit in a little bit of writing at the end. So a text is a wonderful source of this knowledge and skills development in our case. And I'm really happy that we have a chance to actually have those lessons in our school. I have quite a few of
And
them.
and I think also what you've described with the different ways of checking understanding, right? Checking comprehension. You've got, not the traditional, say we've read a text and you go, where does John live? What is the name of
Yeah,
John's
yeah,
mother?
yeah, yeah,
Whatever.
yeah.
That you present them with pictures. I think that's really less threatening for some.
Of course, yes,
And
yes.
I'd seen something that you had shared at the weekend
Mm-hmm,
regarding comprehension. So they had the sentences and then they had to draw
mm-hmm,
their understanding, or they had to draw what the sentence depicts. And again, for
mm-hmm,
that
mm-hmm,
level, right, for kids who are they probably have a lot more, they're a lot stronger
mm-hmm,
than they think
mm-hmm,
in their spoken expression, but may feel shy, may be afraid of making mistakes
mm-hmm,
because of pronunciation, may be afraid that they might be laughed
mm-hmm,
at. And to do something like that, to draw their understanding of something
mm-hmm,
is absolutely,
mm-hmm,
suited
mm-hmm.
to less confident learners.
Yeah, and we started this session, this podcast, by talking about how literacy is about the ability to read and write and make sure that both actions, both activities are meaningful to you and to others. So I think it's really important to give our students a chance to demonstrate that they have understood or they have completed a task or a writing task by, like I said, giving them a chance to demonstrate this understanding, even if they can't perhaps orally express their ideas that well. So by matching pictures to words, by putting pictures in order, by filling in just one word, for example, and then reading out the sentence, you give them this fulfillment, this sense of fulfillment and sense of achievement that they have really understood the text or understood the book, and they're able to show this understanding to you as well.
Yep. Well, let's before we finish with some advice from you, we're going to just listen to these messages real quick.
Empowering education with Easy for You, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionizes the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. we're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy for you, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easyforyou.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MAT leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the three-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
So there you are. I think it's actually quite fitting that our most recent message is from readingsolutions.co.uk. You know, we're talking about developing lifelong readers. As we come to the end of the show, Anna, could you share with us some maybe tips or tricks, some things that teachers should look out for when working with EAL learners as regards literacy skills, developing their reading, you know, their lifelong reading skills?
Yeah, I think the biggest and most important piece of advice for me would be do not overlook and do not underestimate their oral skills development and the oral work that you should be doing really in any reading or writing lesson. We need to understand that reading is not just about decoding. It's not just about blending. We need to understand that writing is not just about spelling, segmenting, sounds in words and spelling words. It's about communicating an idea, or about understanding an idea in reading and communicating an idea in writing. And it's really, really extremely challenging to do it if you don't have enough oral language to express this idea first, or you don't have enough vocabulary to understand the idea. So, yeah, sorry, like I said, making sure that in any reading or writing lesson, there is definitely some time to help students engage with the topic, to help them activate the right background knowledge, even if it's encoded in their first or primary language, which is not English. Giving them this opportunity to do this, and giving them a chance to talk about it, I think that's the key to success. I know that in many schools, they even try now to delay the development of reading and writing skills just a bit to ensure that there is enough oracy, that their students have enough oral skills and listening skills, because they are the solid foundation for the developing of reading and writing skills.
I mean, that really does make sense to me, because you've got to be, I mean, it's similar to first language acquisition, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
We hear language first, and then we start expressing ourselves through the means of, very basic language, and then our vocabulary increases, our syntax increases. And we also develop, in our L1, that vocabulary, that lexical area that's most interesting to us in the very early stages. I remember with my kids, having been interested in dinosaurs or whatever other animals, that was there. That was where you would see, or I would see, the biggest jump in their lexical development. Another question I had for you was, to what extent, and as we come to the end of the show, for any other EFL teacher who's listening in, or language teaching professional, you mentioned a lot of the skills, a lot of the strategies that we teach in EFL. You mentioned that they're incorporated in your own work, working with, literacy in Key Stage 1 with your EAL learners. To what extent has that EFL knowledge made you or influenced your style of, your way of helping these young children develop their literacy skills?
Oh, to a huge extent. I think, language acquisition is language acquisition, and language learning is language learning. It's, of course, there are quite a few specifics about EAL, and it's not a general English development. We need to remember that. And I think the first speaker talked about that, right, in your first podcast.
Right.
We focus a lot on academic functions. We focus a lot on academic vocabulary, on those like cognitive abilities that we need to try to develop with the help of the language. But the underlying skills which you bring in from EFL, like, the skill of breaking down a huge subskill, a big subskill, into subskills, and separately practicing each of these subskills, or by adding like additional scaffolding into your lessons. All of that, I think a lot of this comes from EFL, because very often we have students who are beginners, and we need to make sure that their language is developed in EFL. And I think, in this respect, I think I've taken all the best teaching strategies and learner training strategies from EFL, and I've tried to marry them with teaching the more cognitive, the more academic content and subject content in EAL. I guess that would be my answer to this.
Yeah, I think definitely it's the same with me. In the context that I'm currently teaching, I also have that EFL background, and there are, certain things that I definitely, had learned as part of my training, that I'm saying, okay, this is what we don't do EAL, we do EAP, English for Academic Purposes, and I use the same processes. On that note, Anna, I would like to thank you for two things. I would like to thank you for the work you do with these young learners in Key Stage 1. It is very, very valuable work. I'm always grateful for all the educators out there who work at that level, simply because I cannot do it. I find it challenging. I don't think I have it. I don't have the knowledge, the strategies of how to do it. And I'd like to thank you for your time, for being here with us today. Thank you so much for your insights. We have enjoyed having you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Oh, that's so sweet. So thank you everybody else for listening in. We have many, many other Teacher Talk radio shows this week, and you can listen back to previous episodes on www.ttradio.org/listen back. Have a very, very good week. Goodbye, everyone.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.